Today's video will be an overview on how I approach coin cleaning and preservation. I'll be going over tools, technique, and general advice that I've gained over many hours of practice. To illustrate this process, we'll be taking the obverse of a Byzantine anonymous phallus from an unclean state to a point where we can adequately preserve and attribute it. Restoring ancient coins has been a hobby of mine for the last few years. Along the way, I've gotten a few questions on technique and process, mainly around my use of mechanical methods in cleaning. On screen are a few different restorations I've done in the past to get a good idea of what a before and after result might look like. A quick note, depending on the coin, I'll typically use a mixture of both mechanical and chemical cleaning. This video will not cover any chemical methods, as it's rather a large topic and mechanical will give us a great result to begin with. So, before we begin, a common question that I often get is around whether or not it's acceptable to clean coins in the first place. I feel like most modern collectors would be horrified at the thought of cleaning their collections. However, the ancient coins we were working with have been buried for hundreds, if not thousands of years. In an unclean state, any details are hidden under thick layers of hardened dirt and deposits. More importantly, these layers can also hide active corrosion, so cleaning not only improves the aesthetics and accurate attribution of the coin, but it's also a crucial step in preservation. That being said, a rushed or sloppy effort will leave us with a coin that's either damaged, improperly conserved, or of a diminished value compared to its unclean state. In terms of tools, we'll only be using 3 in this process: a stereoscopic microscope, a hobby blade or a scalpel, and a large sewing needle with a flattened tip. I'll give more information on the needle later in the process when we require it. For a microscope, I'm using an Amscope SM1B with an LED ring. I tend to stay away from digital microscopes as you lose out on depth of field, which is really useful for fine detail work. For a scalpel, I prefer a number 6 hobby blade. The style of blade comes down to personal preference, but I find the shortened, angled chisel tip to be really useful for navigating around details on our surface. Now that we have an overview of cleaning and we've covered tools, let's begin. We take our scalpel and begin to remove the first layer of loose dirt off of our coin. I use very light pressure, gliding the blade at a shallow angle over the surface in a semicircular motion. This layer generally should come off quite easily, as the coin has been soaking in distilled water for about 2 weeks now. I'm only focusing on getting the easy dirt off of our surface. If I find any areas that are offering resistance or feel too compacted, I just leave them alone for the time being. For the beginning stages, I tend to prefer a scalpel that I've already worn down from use. Too sharp of a blade will risk small nicks on our patina. Generally, a worn-in blade will move the loose dirt off of our surface fairly efficiently, while posing less of a risk of damage. I tend to prefer sharper, fresh blades in the later stages of cleaning when I require them. As this process generally takes hours, I'll speed up the video as I go into detail. For now, I'm using very light pressure on the surface of our coin. Only really enough to remove the top layer of dirt. Too much pressure can work against us in a few ways. Most importantly, it can risk damaging our surface, either by gouging or nicking the patina if the blade slips. It can also compact the dirt, making it much harder to remove in the later stages of cleaning. Compacted dirt can take on a shiny appearance and adheres to the surface to a much higher degree, as well as taking longer for distilled water to work on. This will become a much more important aspect to keep in mind when we start our detail work. Since I know the lot that this coin comes from, as well as what the reverse looks like, I can already guess where the details will be on the coin based off its type as an anonymous issue Byzantine phallus. This speeds up the process, as I know in this case I don't have really complex legends to worry about, and I can guess roughly where the portrait will fall. Some coins, however, will start off completely unidentifiable. All this means is that the first pass should be taken slowly until you have a reasonable idea of where your details are. At this stage, we're removing a lot of dirt fairly quickly, so progress does feel substantial. It's very easy to keep invested, as the process of uncovering details is generally quite fun. In the later parts, progress will slow considerably, and hours can be spent on getting that last percent of the details out of the coin. Patience, other than practice and skill, is probably the most important factor in getting a great result. Generally speaking, if I start feeling impatient, rather than rushing the process and risking damage, or just calling the coin done out of frustration, I'll oftentimes just re-soak it in distilled water for a week. This will help soften the dirt in the deposits further, making my job easier, but it also helps renew my interest in the coin and keep up the level of focus required to get a good result out of it. So, after a few passes with the scalpel, it's time to start the first pass of detail work. I can already see where the portrait and the major details fall now, so I'll begin by removing the larger deposits of dirt around them. For this I use a large sewing needle that I've ground down to have a flattened tip. This makes it really useful for pushing and scraping dirt in the smaller areas that the scalpel has trouble getting to. Just like with the scalpel, difference in sharpness matters. I grind the needle on a ceramic whetstone to determine the sharpness of my flattened edge. Too much sharpness increases the chances of scratching our patina, whereas too dull of a tip will polish and compact the dirt, making our job harder. The process of sharpening generally does take a bit of practice, but I don't find that it's too technical or difficult over time. As we progress through that detail pass, angle matters, since at this point we're tackling the more stubborn dirt and deposits left over from our first pass. Varying up the angle at which we move the needle over our surface can help break up some of those harder areas. As before, I prefer to do multiple light passes, and if I feel resistance in any given area, I'll just simply leave it for the next pass. The idea behind this is that we are left at the end only with the most difficult areas to tackle, and we have much more space on our surface to deal with them. The details pass is really all about exposing the natural relief of our surface. The valleys of the coin will naturally collect more compact dirt, flattening out the appearance. By carefully removing these deposits, we bring a lot more depth to our surface and bring life and nuance back to the art of the coin. So, on the topic of details, a word of caution. Removing dirt from the crevices of the coin is an important step in getting the original artwork to shine through. However, with too much pressure, we can accidentally artificially carve into the patina, sometimes accentuating or even creating details that were not present in the original artwork. This process is called tooling, and it's quite frowned upon by most serious collectors. Sometimes this is simply done by a lack of care in cleaning. However, oftentimes it is used as a deceptive method to fake a better strike or details on an otherwise worn down coin. Ultimately, our goal in conservation is that we want to represent the art in the most accurate light possible without adding any coloring of our own. As mentioned before, this part of cleaning takes quite a bit of time, for much more modest results. I find that the difference between beginners and more experienced restorers is how much detail they can bring out from this process. Time and patience are key here. Keep in mind, this coin took hundreds or even thousands of years to accumulate these deposits, so a few extra hours of effort will go a long way to preserve it for generations to come. When it comes to ancients, preserving the natural patina of the coin is our main goal. The lengths we go to in removing external dirt and deposits are ultimately down to personal preference. Some collectors enjoy leaving some dirt on the surface, while others prefer a cleaner aesthetic. As I'm an artist working in the film industry, my main draw to the hobby, other than restoration, is to showcase the beauty of the coin's art, so I tend to lean towards uncovering as much detail as I can underneath the dirt. As the natural surface starts to emerge, I can see that I'm quite lucky with this coin. There is no major corrosion and very minimal mineral deposits on the patina. Near the bottom of the portrait's collobium or robe, there is however a hardened encrustation that I will carefully remove. Switching back to the scalpel, I use a fresh sharp blade. Very light passes at a shallow angle remove small amounts of material from the protrusion until it is level with the rest of the surface. We want to have as sharp of a blade as possible, since applying too much pressure can take off the entire encrustation with the patina under it, leaving a shiny raw bronze spot on our surface. For coins that are heavily encrusted, I try to deal with the softer dirt first, then move on to the harder deposits. This process can be very frustrating for beginners, but it is a very normal part of dealing with ancient patinas. Generally, I find that the amount of encrustations is directly linked to the type of dirt and the amount of moisture that the coin went through as it sat in the dirt for hundreds of years. As we approach the home stretch for the obverse of our coin, I can tackle a few extra questions that I often get. Regarding brushes, both brass and nylon brushes are generally fine as long as you use them on healthy patinas. If I use them, it's generally at the end to get rid of very fine loose dirt that's left over. Varying up the angle that you brush and not using heavy pressure will avoid polishing up your coin and creating shiny spots on the high point. The other common question I tend to get is around toothpicks. Personally, I rarely use them as I dislike having to sharpen them often to keep them from fraying. However, they can give fantastic results as well, as long as you're mindful not to compact the dirt onto the surface with too much pressure. These are quite nice for beginners as well, as they pose little to no risk to the patina and they're safe to use on silver coins. Another set of tools that I tend to use for detail work are diamond dusted pins. They work much in the same fashion as the needle, but they give really great results, albeit at a higher price point, so I use them only for fine details on my nicer coins. As for where I get my coins, this lot of Byzantines comes from Roman Coin Bank, which has been a great source of uncleaned lots for me. For a very in-depth guide to cleaning, Sowell Roll's A Method for Cleaning Ancient Bronze Coins is a phenomenal resource and how I took my first steps into cleaning and restoration. Of course, on that note, as I set up to show the final result for our coin, I do want to emphasize that perfection is perhaps sometimes emphasized a little too heavily in the hobby. Everyone at one point started off as a beginner, and with that comes a healthy amount of mistakes, scratches, polished high points, chipping, overzealous cleaning, and stripped patinas. In fact, I still see many high-end coins with those features online on forums and auctions. Restoration ultimately is an art form, and by taking your time and choosing coins that are appropriate for your skill level, you'll avoid a lot of frustration and regret. Mistakes are okay. Ultimately, we do this out of passion and joy for the hobby. And as your skills grow, the more you'll feel comfortable tackling interesting and fun coins, and your appreciation for the art form will deepen. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to leave any questions or comments in the comments below.